The Madman!
Alright. Whew, that Death Knight review, that was pretty deep. Now let's go back to the usual. Reviewing the non-Death Knight cards. Let's start with Deal with the Devil from Demon Hunter though. 5 mana, Fell spell, summon 2 3/3 Fell Fiends with lifesteal. If your deck has no minions, summon another. This one's fairly straightforward to review. You should run this card if you have no minions in your deck. Is it possible to build a good Demon Hunter with no minions in your deck? Interesting question. I don't think so. There is this card called Abyssal Deaths, which got buffed. 3 mana, which draws 2 minions from your deck. You can actually use that and then play Deal with the Devil. You could build this in a Jace deck. Play Abyssal Depths to draw your Jace, and then you can make the Deal with the Devil. So yeah, interesting card. We'll have to see whether or not the other cards in this set are good non-minion cards. Nerubian Flyer, 2 mana 2/3 Undead Battle Cry. If a friendly undead died after your last turn, summon a 2/2 Nerubian. So for this to activate, you'd want to have played a turn 1 undead minion. If you play turn 1 Mistress of Mixtures and your opponent kills it, Nerubian Flyer on turn 2 will activate. But also if your opponent plays something and you trade your Mistress of Mixtures into it and then you play your Nerubian Flyer, that also works. That is what after your last turn means, either on your opponent's last turn or on this turn of yours. If the undead died, you get the benefit. So yeah, that's a 2 mana 4/5 if, an undead died. That's pretty sweet. This might be a card that you don't play on turn 2 a lot of the time, if there is no, good 1 mana undead, but there probably will be. If there isn't though, this could still be good just because you might play it later on, like on 4 mana, and, it's very efficient, just spending 2 mana for 2/3 and 2/2. I can only imagine that since this card is in Druid, that Druids also must have a swarmy undead deck. Interesting that you would run this instead of an unholy Death Knight deck, but maybe there's enough room for 2 undead decks that swarm people. Over in Hunter, we got Arcane Quiver. 2 mana arcane spell. Discover a spell from your deck. If it's arcane, give it spell damage +1. Currently, cannot really think of a way or a reason why Hunter would want this, so I can only conclude that it's because there's going to be some awesome arcane spell in this set that might do area of effect damage, which you would want to discover with Arcane Quiver. That's about all I have to say about this. Currently, there's no good candidates. Mage has Arcane Bolt, which is a good basic card to see what Mana Thirst does. It's a 1 mana arcane spell which deals 2 damage. Mana Thirst 8 deal 3 damage instead. So if you have 8 mana crystals or 9 or 10, 1 mana deal 3. The card kind of reminds me of Ice Lance, which was a card that was very good. We're talking about, way back at the start of Hearthstone, which dealt 4 damage if the enemy was frozen, which meant you pretty much would only cast it super late. And then otherwise it dealt 0 damage, just froze a thing. Sometimes you'd use it for that. But the point is, a 1 mana card that's cheap that deals damage, it could be run in a deck with spell damage. It has its place and it has its theoretical strong power if there's good spell damage in the game. Arcane Defenders is a pretty interesting arcane spell. 8 mana, summon 2 5/6 golems with taunt, and can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. It's 8 mana to summon 10-12 worth of stats, which has taunt. Can't be removed easily, so pretty much have to use minions to get rid of that. And it's an 8 mana spell, so you can actually get it with Arcane Brilliance. Arcane Brilliance can now, for the first time in quite some time, draw you 4 cards. There are big spell archetypes for Mage right now. This could be one of them, and especially could be one of them because the hero Dawn Grasp card repeats 1 spell of each school of spell that you've cast. This certainly would want to be the arcane spell that you repeat because you'll get so much value. I think, as is, this card is certainly going to be experimented with. Fits right into the decks with Dawn Grasp in it. And Dawn Grasp is in a lot of decks. Paladin's got Blood Matriarch Liadrin, 2 mana 3/2, legendary. After you summon a minion with less attack than this, give it Divine Shield and Rush. Quick reminder that your hero power is summoning a minion, and that summons a 1/1, so your guys, while Liadrin is out, will have 1/1 Divine Shield and Rush. You can play this card and then immediately summon a guy and, rush something down for 1 damage. Obviously, if you're playing Blood Matriarch Liadrin, you're hoping to do better than that. Probably fits the most in a buff deck. Buff decks have a bit of a problem in that they're slow, but Liadrin can allow you to rush with your buff big guy, and because of that Divine Shield, it doesn't even take damage. You could lock your opponent out of the game, because anytime they play stuff, you just play fast cards instead of being a slow hand buff deck. And even in the worst case, this is still 2 mana 3/2, so she can never be that bad. You've also got a spell that funnily does work with Liadrin. For Qualt the Loss, holy 2 mana spell, give a friendly minion +3 attack permanently. Give your hero +2 attack this turn. So it's Blessing of Might, but for 1 more mana, you also give your hero +2 attack. That's actually a pretty good package to package together. This seems like a good card for an aggressive deck. I think the ideal use of this is you would play this on your turn 1 guy. Maybe your turn 1 guy has Divine Shield, and then you hit the face for 4, while you also clear your opponent's minion. Shaman's got a Death Weaver Aura, 2 mana Shadow spell. Give a minion Death Rattle, summon 2 3/2 zombies with Overload 1. This is very similar to Spirit Wolves, which is 3 mana, summon 2 2/3s with Taunt, also with Overload 1. So it has the pro that it costs 1 mana less, it has the con that the zombos do not have Taunt, and it requires you have a minion in play, which is a pretty big downside. This card looks pretty good in a Swarmy's Shaman deck, especially if the Shaman cared about zombies, and it seems like Shamans might be Swarmy and care about zombies. The other card revealed is Unliving Champion. 3 mana 3/2 Undead Battle Cry. If a friendly undead died after your last turn, summon 2 3/2 zombies. So the big payoff for this card is if your opponent killed an undead on their turn, or if you trade an undead, then you can pay 3 mana to get 3 3/2s. That's 9/6 worth of stats for 3 mana. So that's a lot of stats. This card is also going to care a lot if early game zombies are a thing. Zombies do feel like there would be early game things of. So now we're just looking at 1 mana or 2 mana zombie. It's easy to think about how it would be possible for opponents to just sometimes lose on turn 3 if they didn't have an answer to 3 3/2s. That is a lot of stats to throw out on turn 3. They need an answer, and it feels like any answer that they give would, at worst, put you at even, because there's not that many 3 mana spells that, or minions that put you ahead of having to kill 3 3/2s. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to look at the race of who's going to have the best Zombo deck, or if there's going to be multiple decks that are good with Zombos. Is it going to be Death Knight? Yes. Is it going to be Druid? Is it going to be Shaman? Will there be a mysterious Dark Horse challenger who also likes playing with Undead? My bet would be going for Warlock. There might be an Undead Zoo deck. But we'll see. There are no Warlock cards revealed yet. Oh yes, the announcement did say that Priests would have a Necromancer theme as well, so no cards to reveal on the Priest side, but expect them to do something with zombies. Over in Warrior Land, we've got Embers of Strength. It's the spell that summons minions, which isn't a minion, so good for warriors if they don't want minions in their deck. 2 mana, summon 2 1/2 guards with Taunt, Mana Thirst 6, which is a relatively small amount. Relatively low Mana Thirst requirement. Give them +1/+2. So 2 mana for 2 1/2s with Taunt is already decent. Arguably even good. 2 mana for 2 2/4s with Taunt. That's 4/8 worth of stats for 2 mana. Would make a lot of sense for recruit type decks, like big warriors, where you need to pull out big minions from your deck so you can't run small defensive minions. Embers of Strength. This card being fire reminds me that the classes are split into 2 different factions this time around. 6 are on the side of the Scourge, 5 are on the side of Silvermoon. It's like Silvermoon versus Scourge. The side of the Silver Moon is going to be Warrior. You got your Demon Hunter, Mage, Paladin, and Hunter as well. And then the Scourge side is everyone else. Finally, we wrap up Warrior with Silver Fury Stalwart, 6 mana, 4/8 taunt rush, can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. The reason why I break out laughing is it's probably the worst card that I've seen, and it goes to Warrior. It's not terrible, but I can't think of any deck that would want this card. So there's a very comparable card from Rosticon's Rumble, which was a pretty low power expansion. Amani Warbear, 7 mana 5/7 with Rush and Taunt. It's comparable to this card. So this card got a 1 mana discount on Amani Warbear, which only ever saw play in Arena. It's got the same stats, you know, it's got 1 less attack, 1 more health, and has the bonus of can't be targeted by spells or hero powers, but who knows how big of a deal that is. It probably isn't that big a deal. Given the pathetic showing of Warrior from the last expansion, I would have liked to see this card have a bit of more pity stats. Does Warrior only exist to make Death Knight look good? Couldn't we have made it a 4/9? Maybe a 5/8? Give the Warrior something. Alright, now let's take a look at the neutral cards. Got Boneflinger, 2 mana undead, 2/3. Battle Cry, if a friendly undead died after your last turn, deal 2 damage. Oh nice, it's a 2 mana 2/3 which deals 2 damage. I think it's definitely a worthy consideration in any deck that is going for the early Swarm Undead theme. You've got Scourge Rager, 3 mana 5/4, undead with Reborn. Battle Cry, die! First of all, that's awesome. Great flavor. Second of all, I've reviewed a card like this before in custom Hearthstone cards. And, fun fact, the guy who posted that custom Hearthstone card, he is now on the design team for Hearthstone. So he copied himself. He plagiarized himself. Very good. Why is this better than Magma Rager? 1, it's got an undead tag. 2, undead dying matters. So you could play Scourge Rager and then immediately play a card that cares about an undead having died. 3, if you resurrect this somehow, maybe this card could actually be pretty insane. If you're a priest and you're a necromancer and you're raising the undead, like, can you imagine the horrors if this card got resurrected on the cheap? Maybe you can only resurrect specific undead. This card is a nightmare to deal with if there's like a early game priest resurrection card. You curve this on turn 3 and then on turn 4 you play the card that resurrects undead. And then you get a 5/4 with Reborn? That's pretty scary. This could definitely be a Rager that isn't a joke. Infected Peasant. Looks like it could be a good early game card for a lot of undead swarmy decks. 2 mana 2/1, Death Rattle summon a 2/2 Undead Peasant. The first part is not an undead because they are still nice and fleshy. But after this dies, it becomes an Undead Peasant with the Undead tag. Pretty good stat line. Just a good solid basic card. Very solid fill-in for undead early game decks. And the fact that she's sticky means that in Druids, which like sticky boards, because they have board-wide buffs, you can definitely see it there as a main card. Next we got Silver Moon Sentinel, 3 mana 2/5 with Taunt and Mana Thirst 8, gain +2/+2 and Divine Shield. So this turns out to be a card that's really good to play on turn 3 against an aggro deck, and really good to play from turn 8 and onwards, because 3 mana 2/5 Taunt on 3, solid. 3 mana 4/7 Taunt with Divine Shield when you're turn 8 and onwards, that's pretty solid. This is the type of card that I really like seeing, because it could have just been a boring filler neutral card if they made the Mana Thirst bonus not very high. But because the Mana Thirst bonus is this much, it's like, wow, I would really consider playing this in a lot of control decks. I think it's just really cool for there to be good anti-aggro tools such as this printed. May not always be good, but if the meta was ever super fast, I would want Silver Moon Sentinel on my side. Next we got a Street Sweeper. 4 mana 2/2 Battle Cry, deal 2 damage to all other minions. keeping up with the tradition that brooms are overpowered, I guess. Volcanic Potion, which comes with a 2/2. Volcanic Potion was a mage-only card, and now classes which didn't have access to small AoE will now have it. And this card may not compare that favorably with Spammy Arcanist, but it's an option. It does seem like a lot of undead are going to have 2 health, so dealing 2 damage could be a very magical number. Over at the big mana, we've got Lorthamar Theron. 7 mana, 7/7. Battle Cry double the stats of all minions in your deck. Wow, that's a quite a big effect. Probably the big way to cheat this out early would be to have Vandar Stormpike. I don't know if many decks are going to have a way to search up Vandar, but if you could, you play your Vandar, you play your Lorthamar, and then you have like all the big cards in your deck, all costing three less. That could be a deck. Otherwise, with Lorthamar, you're probably looking to be playing a big control deck that'll go a long time, but I'm not entirely sure that those decks tend to have that many minions in the deck and that they can spend a turn playing a 7 mana 7/7. So, interesting card, really big effect, but looks like a very slow card. Might just be too slow. On 8 mana, you've got Invincible, a legendary 5/5 with the first Undead Beast tag that we've seen from this expansion, the first double type. Invincible has Reborn, and it has Battle Cry and Death Rattle. Give a random friendly undead +5/+5 and Taunt. So it's an 11/11 total buff bonus over Bone Mare. This card is going to be such a pain to deal with when you're playing for value, or if you're playing to stay alive. It's one of those nightmarish mid-range cards that control players look at and shudder. It's like, this card turns what would normally not have been a threat into a threat. It itself is a threat twice, and when it dies, it turns another card that wasn't really going to be a threat into a threat. We're just going to say this card creates like 4 threats in one card. So I'm thinking about it and I'm having a headache when I'm a control player. Worth mentioning that Death Rattles go off before Reborns, which is something that I have to remember all the time. With this expansion, you really should remember that because there's Death Rattle and Reborn lurking around all the corners. So Death Rattles go off before Reborns, which means you cannot give itself +5/+5 and Taunt after the Reborn, which would really be disgusting if it could. And finally, we end with a card that is out already. 9 mana, the Sunwell, Holy Spell. Fill your hand with random spells, cost 1 less for each other card in your hand. This is a card that immediately saw testing in Rogue with Swift Scale, because Swift Scale Naga will discount this down to 0, so you can play the Naga, and then you can play this. It's often run in Thief Rogue, the Swift Scale Naga. Theoretically, this is a good value card. If you're playing a control deck, maybe you run out of value near the end, and then you're running the Sunwell, so you cast a lot of mana in order to generate a lot of random spells. I'm not entirely sure that there's a meta right now, which is a value deck which wants to skip their turn in order to like play a spell in order to add a lot of cards to their hand so that they can do random stuff in the future. This reminds me of how bad my free-to-play Sunken City deck was, where the idea was to outvalue over time by generating value, but it took a while. That's basically the Sunwell. Very slow value generator. Not entirely sure that this is a card that, has a place in any meta. I shouldn't say any meta. If the meta ever didn't really have combo decks and there were enough anti-aggro decks, then yeah, you might want to outvalue your opponents with the Sunwell. It's cool that it's very flexible in that you could play it for 9 mana and then fill your hand, your empty hand. You could play it for 5 mana. 5 mana generates 6, certainly doesn't sound bad. Also really cool how they introduced the first neutral spell with our very, very impactful card. While this may be like too much of a value card to ever include in your deck, you better believe that there will be games decided when you discover spells, and all classes can discover the Sunwell. The Sunwell is probably one of the best cards to discover when you know, you and your opponent are both running on fumes and you somehow get the option to discover it. It's like, wow, that's a lot of fuel. So this set is going to be the biggest ever with 145 cards, 10 more than usual. Looking forward to reviewing them all.